Welcome to everybody, whether you're online or in person. We appreciate you showing up. The purpose of today was just to do a little brainstorming, a little thinking about what is volunteering and what can make it a more meaningful experience for you and for maybe the group that you're volunteering with. And so we're going to dive into this a little bit and talk a little bit about it and kind of set up some things that are coming down the pipeline for this spring. So first question for you to think about is why or why not do you volunteer? Think about that. If you're in a volunteer space, why do you do that? Is it because you want to make a difference for others? That's one reason. And there's no right or wrong answer on this. Maybe you want to help the environment. Maybe you want to make a difference in a life. Maybe you want to help amplify a voice. Someone who can't speak for themselves as well as they'd like to, or they need help with their voice. Maybe you volunteer for yourself from the standpoint that you want to gain confidence and self-esteem, or maybe even learn a new skill. Habitat for Humanity is one place that's really great about teaching you new skills while you're volunteering. Maybe you do it from a social aspect, a way to meet new people. Or maybe it's because you have a belief in a cause, or you're answering a call that's in the community. Maybe it's a way for you to better know the community that you're in, or a community maybe you don't know much about. It's also a way to connect to your community. And for me, at least, the most important part of volunteering is because we are a community. That's what we do to care for each other. We're all part of a community. We shouldn't be segregated or cordoned off. It's what we do together as a community. So that was just something to think about. If I used the word service or mission instead of volunteer, would that change any of that for you? Just something to think about. So what makes a good or a bad volunteering experience? So I'm just going to share a little bit about me so that we can move into the next part of this. So one of my passions and one of the things that I feel very strongly about is food inequity. And so when I first moved to the cities, I took myself down to Second Harvest to volunteer. And I did not have a good experience. And it wasn't because I don't believe in what they were doing, but I came in on a day where things were a little topsy-turvy. The group that was there packing boxes came once a month. That was their day to be there. And they knew exactly what to do, and I kind of stood there and I felt a little awkward. And the most embarrassing part, and the part that sticks in my head, was we were supposed to be placing a loaf of bread or a bag of buns or whatever in the box, and every time I did that, partly because I don't have very good spatial relations, was I felt like I was squishing the bread down in there. And all I could think about was, who wants to pick up a loaf of bread that's been completely mangled by this stupid volunteer who couldn't figure out how to do it, right? So I left, and I was embarrassed, and I felt uncomfortable, and I felt myself not wanting to go back. And that wasn't Second Harvest's fault by any means. I'm just saying that was a particular experience. It didn't go well for me. But I ended up later on down the road getting hooked up with Every Meal. And I loved that because they were like, this is the way you do it, and this is what you do, and you were trained at the beginning. And I got done, and they were great about saying, you've packed 5,257 meals in this last hour and a half or whatever. And so that was a good experience for me. And I didn't need a particular talent because they don't put bread in boxes, so I didn't have to worry about squishing anything. But anyway, just to say that there are good and bad experiences, but why? Are you not following maybe your gifts or your talents, or have you misaligned with that? Or you're just somebody who wants to be given a job and do it? Well, sometimes that doesn't always align either. So what we're hoping to do is to have a little bit of a conversation now about what could I do in better understanding myself and my gifts or where I might serve to align with a cause so that it's a better experience for myself and more fulfilling and is also a better outcome for the group that I'm volunteering with. So I'm going to ask Shelby Wagner to step up and talk to us a little bit more about some of those ideas.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Hi. Hello, everyone online. Yeah, I think before I dive into thinking about, your talents and how to connect to a volunteer opportunity, sharing just a couple opportunities that I've been a part of that felt really fulfilling because I feel like they related to some of these aspects that I think are really important. And three things thinking about your talents and your hobbies, where and who do you enjoy serving, and what times are available in your schedule. So thinking about how those three things intersect to find really your sweet spot. So this past year or two, it's been challenging to be in person in places, but for me, I wanted to be able to help. And I love food, and food is like my love language. And so I found an opportunity where I was able to help pack meals for Indigenous elders. And I got to be in the kitchen while the chefs were making the soups and all these beautiful meals prepared with different ingredients and all these different smells. And with like every bowl of soup that I was ladling and packaging up, like it was filling my soul knowing someone else was going to have this nourishing meal. And also I got to be a part and present for just this amazing meals being made. And it was beautiful in that it spoke something to me and that what I enjoy, but it was also a much needed thing for someone in the community, for Indigenous elders who didn't have access to food at the time, who were struggling with health, to know that it was playing a role in that way. And then that third component is that it was come at Tuesday from 2 to 4. And I could very easily say, yes, I have time from 2 to 4 on Tuesday. And so inviting people to think about what is that sweet spot for you. So thinking about talents and hobbies, what do you enjoy? What comes really easy for you? It's really natural for us to overlook some of the things that we do well because it's just what we do, right? Or we might think, well, yeah, I like food, but what does that mean? There are different ways. I remember being here in the Great Hall, it's probably been 2 years now, where we all packed meals, and it was so energizing because we were all excited knowing each box was going to bring that many more meals, and we were in community together. Opportunities like that really energize me. So it's thinking about, what do you enjoy? What do you do well? And really, it excites you in finding opportunities to do that. I know for myself, too, I love being outdoors, and I'm excited this year to get involved in helping with the garden. So Bob, hold me to that, because I do love being outside. I love just smelling the dirt, and that is not a way that I have volunteered before and really want to do because that's something that I am passionate about and would like to learn about, and I know it would really help this community because it takes a village to continue, growing this environment that we're cultivating on these grounds. So really thinking about that, and if you aren't sure what your talents are, or what ways to help, thinking about what do people often come to you for? How are they asking you for help? We have assessments like Clifton Strengths that tell us like what we're good at. I helped with a coat drive last winter because I used to be a project manager, and it's really easy for me to put things in place and create steps and tell people in what order we need to do things. And that might not sound very exciting, but it's needed, right? When we have these volunteer efforts, it takes a variety of different talents, and I think sometimes we get kind of caught up in there's one way to volunteer, I must be able to do it this way, I must like packing a box. And the truth is we need a diverse audience, diverse mindset of talents to make something work. And so it's thinking about what feels good to you. And then, who or where do you enjoy serving? Like I said, I'm excited to be outdoors and really like just get into the dirt and be dirty. That might not be exciting to someone else. Maybe you like more of the one-on-one. Maybe you like it when it's a group atmosphere and that's really energizing. So the more you can define it, I kind of call it like the red car syndrome. Like the more you're really clear on how you want to serve, the easier it will be to spot an opportunity of where you can plug in. Because like when you get that red car and then you're like, dang, everyone has a red car. It's like, no, they've always been there. You just have one now, right? So it's really being clear so you can see when that pops up, like, yes, that is for me. And then I think that last piece is, what time do you have? What really is your capacity? I know sometimes we can feel a little like, oh, like I have a lot on my plate, and as much as I'd love to help, I can't. And that's okay. Like if that's the season you're in, I'm a parent, I am an entrepreneur, I've got a lot of things going on, right? And so there are times where I'm tapped out. But there are also times where I know like I have that Tuesday from 2 to 4. And so if you can identify that, again, you can be ready for when something comes up and you can raise your hand and say, yes, there's room on my calendar for that. So again, it's thinking about those 3 components and seeing where they all overlap to really finding your sweet spot. Because the reality is that it does take a village to, keep a community like this going, from the classes to the greeting to the outdoors and the community beyond, right? Not just here in this building, but in the communities that we live in. It takes each of us being able to show up, whether it's for 30 minutes, once a month, or one time. That is the work we're being called to do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shelby and Cheryl. So I just also kind of at the end want to talk just briefly, I suppose, particularly not only to the folks in the room, but also online about our Sunday school class that's coming up, our adult education. Basically, starting in February, pretty much going up into May, we are going to be looking at the broad concept of mission or of missional engagement. And what is that exactly? That's where, faith meets life. That's where the community intersects with the world. That's where volunteering can happen, right? Whether that's in the church or outside. And what I want to do is guide us through some of the history of Christian mission, some of the interesting, provocative components, but also some of the more complicated elements and moments in the history of the church. There's three big sort of things that we're going to wind up hitting that I think sort of connect a little bit to, and one of the reasons why I think the fact that Shelby's doing the identity workshop on the 5th and then this class starts on the 6th is in a sense like you get called into something to discover part of yourself. One of the really big themes that comes up in the history of mission is that oftentimes the people that think they're the missionaries are the ones who get missioned. They get changed, right? You get involved in something in the hopes that you can make a difference, you can change, etc. But it's very definitely a two-way street. And that's the case theologically as well as just experientially for a lot of folks. But these 3 big things. One is this notion of being on pilgrimage. The language of mission is actually a modern language. It doesn't exist really until the 16th century. And the way that people talked about people who did something that looked like being a mission person was they described themselves as a pilgrim. And I love that image particularly in the ancient sensibility of just being on a journey, right? Being willing to enter into someone else's story, being willing to be affected by them, coming alongside, becoming vulnerable in the midst of their vulnerability. That's part of what that sort of pilgrimage imagery, I think, evokes. And I'll talk, when we talk a little bit about this, I'll be particularly talking about the Irish. I'm of Irish extraction, and there's a sort of proclivity among the Irish to wander, and they call it wandering. And so we're going to talk about God's wanderers as a part of that. The second thing that I think is really kind of interesting that does intersect to some of what we've been talking about is translation. One of the interesting or maybe even unique things certainly about Christianity, though it's not solely Christianity, but definitely Christianity, Judaism, is this idea that our holy text can be translated and should be translated. I mean, most of us don't speak Greek or Latin or Hebrew, right? Or Aramaic. And so you see these early moments of translating scripture into other languages, and when it goes into that other language, it takes on a life of its own. It becomes its own thing. It becomes something profound. And so figuring out how to translate my commitment, our commitment to sharing God's love into ways that actually touch other people's lives, but in such a way that we don't necessarily have control over it. I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And so I'll bring in some examples and we'll talk a little bit about translation. And one of the great insights of the last century is this idea that God is really in the business of translating God. That's really what the incarnation is about. God becomes one of us, and in so doing makes God's self known. And then I think the last is the last sort of big concept that kind of connects to some of what we're talking about is this idea of contextualization, or doing things in a way that are not imposing, but actually align with those with whom we're trying to serve or those whom we are serving. That's what contextualization, I suppose, could mean. Enabling what it is that we're talking about, what it is that we want to do in terms of service, doing it in such a way that it makes sense in the context that we're talking about. And so I love that this will be, I think that'll also kind of be something that we'll hit on in certain kinds of ways as you think about how do I take my gifts, that how do I make those work in other kinds of contexts that I might not be familiar with. So I hope that you'll consider joining us for that class. There's two additional components I'd like you to know about. One of them is sort of in the March, April, we're planning to have folks in our church come and share their experiences of volunteering or of being involved in other ministries or nonprofits that our church may or may not be connected to. So we might have someone talking about immigration, or someone talking about being involved in, there were several other options. I'm looking at Michelle, sort of trying to rack my brain. But the notion really is that mission or missional living is happening all the time, that we're all called in one way or another to be engaged in that, and that can look really, really differently. And it's perfectly fine. But that sense of diversity of how do we get involved, how do we volunteer, is, I think, very much at the heart of the way that we should be trying to pursue and understand the gospel. And then the last thing we're hoping to do in May is to possibly kind of relaunch something like a small group experience where we create small groups that are organized around certain missional passions. So if you have a passion for the environment, or you have a passion for immigration rights, or you have a passion for something else, get together as a group, you have an experience together, and then you have a debrief of that experience. And that kind of occurs over the course of a month. And then we'll see what happens. If those groups congeal even more and they become something greater, then that would be all the better. So anyway, that's kind of what's going on here. And yes, and also our Monday meditations will be featuring at the same time our different mission partners, and particularly our Blessing Initiative partners. So we want to encourage you to check that out as well. So with that, I think, Cheryl, did you have a final comment or anything? Yeah, that's a great point. So if something that we've said today sparks, or if you're watching this later on, or you hear about it, because there's so many of us in here, that the word is going to spread like a fire throughout the church. But you're like, I've got some time. I'm feeling better about, the conditions right now. I want to re-engage. I want to volunteer. The best person to contact here at church is Michelle Steinke. She's our connections coordinator, and she can connect you with a whole host of opportunities, and maybe even have a conversation with you to help you discern where you might want to head. And if you are looking also to discerning, really do want to plug again Shelby's class on the identity workshop, which will be next Saturday from 9 to noon, I believe, in the Hearth Room. Is that right? That's right, okay. And you can register for that online. All right, well, thank you so much to our audience. Thank you to our speakers. And thank you to folks online, to our tech, Matt. Blessings to all of you.